Have you been thinking about change or desiring change in your life, but you kind of worry that you're too old to change? If this is you, the good news is that that's exactly what I'm talking about in this video. And by the end of this video, you're going to have a whole new perspective on being too old to change, and you're going to have some tips and tricks to take away as well. Hey everyone, I'm Alex. I'm a former 9-to-5er turned life coach, and I'm here to help you discover your purpose, start your dream biz, and leave your 9-to-5. So one of the biggest things that stops us from pursuing our dream lives, finding our passion, and living the life that we truly desire are our thoughts. And one thought that you may be having right now is that you're too old to change, or you may fear that soon, if you don't change now, you may be too old to change. I have some experience with this from when I started considering a career change and trying to figure out the direction of my life, and I felt a lot of pressure to figure things out quickly because I wanted to get certain things done by certain ages. So my story with this starts back when I was 26. I was laid off from my job at the time, and I had also started thinking about potentially changing my career or going back to grad school or doing something like that. And I felt a lot of pressure to figure out what my next steps were quickly because if I was going to grad school, I wanted to get that done before I was 30. And it's kind of ridiculous saying this out loud and thinking back on it now because when you're in your 20s, you have so much time and you think that your whole life is going to end by the time you're 30 for some reason. And my rush to figure things out came from this internalized fear that I have, and that was the fear of falling behind in life. I felt like if I went to grad school and changed my career path, that I was going to be falling behind, and I wanted to get back on track as quickly as possible. And I really felt like I would be starting from zero, even though I had so much life experience and work experience up until that point. At the time, I had been considering going a conventional route again, so going back to school, getting a master's in a slightly different degree, and starting from scratch, basically. I felt like I was going to be starting from scratch as far as like being a junior person again in a new career and having to start working my way up the ladder and the experience and all of that again. And it's funny because even at that time, I knew in my head that like when you're 26, 27 years old, you have lots of time to figure things out. So I had that voice that was like, you have lots of time to figure things out, it's okay. And then I had the other voice that was like, you need to get your life back on track, or you need to figure out what you're doing and have your life be nice and buttoned up before you're 30. And for me, I really wanted to stay on track. This is something that has motivated me since I was a child in school. I always wanted to keep up with my peers or even be ahead of my peers, like those people that graduate from school early. Like that had always appealed to me. I always wanted to make sure I was doing things right and that I was on track. And so now that I have a little bit of perspective, I've been out of my career for almost a year now, and what I've learned is that I actually feel more on track now in what I'm doing than I ever did in my old career that didn't suit me. And so even though I'm still building this career for myself and I have a lot of goals that I would like to hit down the road, I feel on track. And once you get out of that misaligned career and you're kind of off of society's conveyor belt, you really stop worrying about being on track in the first place. You just know that what you're doing is working for you and it feels right, and you know that things are going to align and just fall into place when they naturally should, and you know things are going to work out. And when I think about what staying on track really means for me, it means doing everything right at the right time and keeping pace with your peers. And when I think about that even more, it has this undertone of accomplishment and competition and doing things for the perception of others and not for yourself, or the perception of society in general of what is successful. And so you're trying to stay on track so that people perceive you in a positive light and so that you're perceived as doing things right in life and just being successful. And it doesn't really have anything to do with your internal sense of satisfaction. It just means you're hitting these mile markers because everyone says you should and because everyone will heap praise onto you if you hit those. And as far as being on track in life, I think the metric that we should be measuring things by is how fulfilled we feel in our life. And not fulfilled in the sense of, oh, I bought this house, I bought this car, I bought all these things, because those really provide momentary fulfillment. But, you get something new and then it isn't that long before the shininess and the excitement of it wears off. And then you have to buy something else to have that temporary sense of fulfillment in your life. And what I'm talking about is deep fulfillment that comes from living a life that is deeply satisfying to you. Even when it's hard, you can do hard things and it can be super satisfying because you know that you're living in alignment with your values, with your ideal lifestyle, you're having the type of impact that you want to have. That's the type of fulfillment that we want to aim for in this life. So what I've learned since I've stopped worrying about being off track in life is that when you feel on your path to success, you actually don't really worry about timelines. You just have this internal trust and faith and knowing that you're on your right path and that things are going to work out when they should and that everything will happen in time. And so at this time in my life, I really feel like I'm on track with what I'm doing, and it's really allowed me to release this sense of needing to feel on track and on time with my life. I just know that what I'm doing is leading to where I want to go. It's making me happier, it's making me feel fulfilled. And so I don't have this worry about some societally conditioned timeline or being on track in my mind. I just can live my life and do things as I like without having to worry about being on track. And it's been really freeing being on this path and not having to worry about being perceived as being on track or putting those sort of limitations on myself in my own life. And when I think back to my engineering career, when I think about being on track for that career, what would that look like, right? I would be maybe staying in the position that I was in for a little bit longer, then maybe I'd be moving up to a more senior position. Maybe one day I would start supervising a small team and becoming that sort of middle manager position. And, eventually you're expected to work your way up to being a manager of a department or a division. And so that was sort of the track that my life was on. And I just know that wouldn't have made me happy at all. And I would have been so unfulfilled and stressed by the weight of all of that kind of expectation that gets placed on you. And for me, if I had been so consumed with staying on track, I would have been rushing down a track that I didn't want to be on. And these feelings of falling behind really come from this societal idea that there's a certain timeline that you have to live your life on. And this goes back to my story where I really felt like, okay, if I go back to grad school, that's going to take 2 to 3 years. And so I really want to be done grad school and back in the workforce by the time I'm 30. And this was all just so arbitrary, and I don't know why I had so much pressure on myself at that time. But in my mind, I had been taught by society and everyone around me that when you're in your 20s, that's your time of experimentation, and that's when you're supposed to be in school, and you're supposed to be done school by your late 20s and your 30s, and that's the time that you're really supposed to spend settling down and just advancing in your career and working on buying a home and having kids and stuff like that. And so I felt like, oh, I don't want to be in my 30s and still in school. That's going to be completely off track in life and on the wrong timeline. And for me personally, I really had taken on this belief that, your 20s is your time to have fun and experiment and kind of do all the things when your life is changing. And then your 30s is really when you just have to settle down, choose your life, and then sort of live that life for the next 50 years of your life. And that just did not seem very empowering. It just put so much pressure on myself in my 20s to have my life figured out by the time I was 30. And one of the lessons that I take away here is that if you really subscribe to the idea that certain things have to happen by certain ages and that you're kind of trapped in that timeline, you can really trap yourself in a life that isn't fulfilling, that isn't satisfying, that is quite frustrating to you because you think you have to sort of have that thing done by a certain age. And if you want to make any changes once you've hit a certain milestone age, you aren't really able to do that. And an example from my own life is when I quit my most recent job, I actually quit that job and I canceled my lease and I moved cities and moved across the country. And even one of my coworkers made the comment that, people usually do this sort of thing in their 20s, not at your age. And that just goes to show that, like, societally, we really put a lot of these limitations on ourselves because of our age and hitting certain milestones and just living the perfect life. And we can feel this heavy pressure from society and our peers, maybe our friends and family, to live a certain way. And we may feel that we have to conform to that. But one thing to keep in mind is that when people say things like that, when people say, oh yeah, that's usually something people do in their 20s, that's just their opinion. That's their own thoughts that they have in their life. That's their rule book that they live by. And when people share their opinions like this, they're just sharing the rules that kind of trap them in whatever life that they're living in, and they project that onto you. And the lesson here for me is that these sort of automatic thoughts or these rules that we have in our heads about life can really trap us. And a tip here is to really start questioning these kind of unspoken or automatic thoughts that we have about our lives, especially when those thoughts become the rules by which we live our life. So if you have thoughts in your life that are like, oh, people that age don't do that, then that's just an arbitrary rule that you may be living by. You need to ask yourself, well, where did that come from? And is that true to me? Or have I just adopted this belief because it's kind of been impressed upon me my whole life? Another thought you may have is, oh, I'm too old to learn something new, or I'm too old to learn the thing that I'm thinking of doing. And you can ask yourself again, where does that thought come from? What makes you too old to learn something new? Is it that you might be slower and that it may take longer? That's not a reason not to do something. Or maybe you worry that people will just judge you because society in general thinks that you shouldn't learn new things past certain ages. But for that one, people are going to judge you regardless. People are always kind of judging you in your life. And so you just need to live for yourself because you'll never make everyone happy. And if you think that the thoughts and opinions of others may be impacting your life, then make sure to check out my people pleasing video up here after you're done watching this one. And if you need a little motivation or some examples of people who have pivoted their lives later in life, then here's a little list for you. The first person on this list is Casey Neistat. He's a huge YouTuber these days, but back in 2015, when he first started his vlog, he wasn't. So he started that vlog that really changed the trajectory of his career and his life when he was 34. Mel Robbins completely recreated her life and her career at the age of 43 when she released her first book and did a TEDx around that time, which completely changed the trajectory of her life. Jen Sincero, the author of You Are a Badass and You Are a Badass at Making Money, didn't change her life and start really making money until she was in her 40s. And now she's a success coach and a New York Times best-selling author. So you can see with these examples that it is possible for ordinary people to completely transform their lives, and it's just a mindset thing that really holds everyone back. Up until this point in the video, I've been talking about limiting beliefs and our mindset and how we impose rules and limits onto the life that we can live. But there are also real life circumstances that do impact our ability to make changes. And I know that some of you could be watching this video, and if you're older than me, you could definitely be looking at me saying, what does she know about being too old? I'm actually too old to change my life. She has so much time to change her life. And I hear you, and to that I say that we all have our own version of being too old for things, because that's what's kind of been societally programmed into us our whole lives. But when I was 27 and thinking about pivoting my life, I was somewhere between being a carefree 20-something and having real adult responsibilities in my life. I had done the right things, like buying a car and buying a little condo downtown. So at the time, I did have a little bit of that responsibility weight on my shoulders because I needed to be financially secure and stable in order to make car payments, make condo mortgage payments, and not have anything be missed that could impact my credit score. So I totally understand this need to have that kind of security and consistency in your life, and the weight and pressure that the responsibilities that we take on can have on our lives. And to quickly pop back to the whole idea of society's timeline, and not to perpetuate it or say that this timeline is right, but to say that a lot of us have probably followed this timeline in one way or another. And so when you're in your 20s, yes, it is easier to change your life because you tend to have checked off less of these society's boxes and you're a little bit less kind of rooted into your life. Like you may not have a car yet, you may not have a mortgage, and so you may just have that flexibility that people who are older tend not to have. So when you get into your late 20s, 30s, and up, you tend to have a lot more of those responsibilities and attachments in your life. So yes, you may have a car, a mortgage, maybe you have 2 cars, maybe you have children, you just have other sort of things that are actual responsibilities in your life that make it a little bit harder to pivot. And so it can be a little bit harder, but you just need to be able to plan for these things, think about these things, and accommodate these things as you're considering changing your life. So the lessons that come out of this are, if you're in your 20s, be mindful of the responsibilities that you take on and the attachments that you create in your life. Be mindful about buying a car that you can't pay off right when you buy it, and so you have to take on that debt financing and you have those monthly payments for the next 5 years or whatever it is. Be mindful when you're taking on a mortgage. Maybe you, like me, will want to change cities a couple times in your life, and you'll have to figure out what to do with your condo and the mortgage that you have. And if you're watching this video and you do want to make a change, but you do have some of these responsibilities in your life, then what you need to do is make a plan around those, write them down, have an understanding of what is needed for each of these responsibilities and attachments in your life. And then ask yourself, how can I reduce these attachments or these responsibilities to make transitioning easier? Or how does my plan need to accommodate these if they can't change? And so for me, I've talked about this before, when I started thinking about quitting my job, I knew that I wanted to pay down my student loan debt and pay off my car because those were both outstanding things that I didn't want to move forward with in my life and have that kind of added stress placed on a new business and a new career. So think about the areas in your life where you can lighten the load a little bit, such as credit card debt, student loan debt, other sort of debt that you may have, like car payments or whatever, and how can you reduce those before you start thinking about making a change in your life? And obviously, if you're someone who has a mortgage or children or other dependents in your life, then you can't just quickly get rid of those, and they just have to be accommodated in your plan. So you need to understand, well, what does it take to maintain and take care of these things in my life? And so what does my new career or the pivot or my new business need to provide? And how much of a runway do I need to have saved up? Or how far along do I want my business to be before I'll be ready to leave my stable 9 to 5 and finally take the leap into living a life that's truly fulfilling? And so I say this in a lot of videos, but it really just takes patience. You need to have patience to change your life. And I truly think that you could change your life within the next 1 to 2 years if you dedicate yourself to it. And if you think about how long it took you to get to where you're at now, maybe that was 5, 10, or 15 years, then 1 to 2 years to kind of untangle that mess and get moving in a new direction is a completely fair trade-off, and it goes by so quickly. So do you want to be working towards a life that you love and a life that you dream of that will make you feel truly fulfilled and happy? Or do you want the next 2 years to just kind of keep you going down the same path and kind of digging the hole even further? So to summarize this video, just remember that there's no timeline in life, there's no doing life right, there's no actual falling behind in life. Whatever timeline you're on is right for you, and you're going to get where you're going when it's right for you. Whatever timeline you're on is right for you, and you don't need to worry about the judgments or societal standards that a lot of us live by. When you find yourself living by these invisible rules that are formed by society's expectations, ask yourself, where did those come from? These are things like, that's just how life is, that's how things are, people that age don't do that, you have to do certain things by certain ages in life. All of these thoughts are just thoughts. They're just kind of made up, and you can either choose to abide by them or choose to make up your own rules in life. And of course, we all have real life responsibilities that can be a concern, but just remember that these things don't hold us back. These things just need to be considered and accommodated in whatever your plan is to move forward. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it gave you some food for thought and some tips on how to overcome some of these struggles. And just remember, you're never too old in life to make change. You can always learn, grow, and change yourself into the person that you want to become. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. It really supports the channel. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for weekly videos like this one. And I'll see you in the next video.